Welcome to Cornerstone Tech Tuesday. My name is Tom Levine, and I'm the tech guru here. Today we're going to be covering some Excel tips and tricks, such as some cell manipulation, cell formatting, general sorting and filtering, freezing panes, formulas, descriptions, and a bit more if we have time. So this is a very useful guide if you want to use Excel in your everyday business practice. Just some mentions first before we get started. We do have our Cornerstone cruise coming up for brokers. That's going to be going for new business sales from January 1st through December 31st of this year. Additional qualification details are available on the Cornerstone website, and you can register at www.crnstone.com/cruise-2020. So that way we can begin tracking your progress. Feel free to contact me or Marilyn with any additional details. Or for any additional details. Additionally, you can also register for all your favorite Cornerstone webinars on our website. We've got the individual corner that's led by Jeff Baglin, obviously the Tech Tuesday corner, which is my thing, and we also have the Build Your Brand webinar, which is pretty big, and that's led by our marketing department with Jess and Marilyn as well. Another thing to note before we get started on this Excel sheet over here, which should be an exact copy of what you have if you downloaded the handout. All names, dates, phone numbers, policy numbers, payment rates, and displays have been randomly generated and are not actual client information at all. Just wanted to get that out of the way as well in case you thought we might be giving you some free leads. So let's go ahead and get started with this, starting with some basic cell manipulation. If you've never used Excel, something like this can look a bit daunting. You see a large spreadsheet, a lot of header information here, a field of numbers and names. And that can be rather daunting, especially if you don't really know how to manipulate or look at what you're trying to do. Some basic cell manipulation to start is to increase the size of a cell or decrease the size of a cell. And you can do that just as I've done over here. If you scroll over the barrier between two different columns or rows even, you get this little arrow. And if you right click, or left click, I apologize, on this and drag and drop, you should be able to size rows and columns. Some additional things that you might want to do with this is moving cells around or full columns or rows. The way you would do that is you would select, let's just start with a cell, this renewal date one. Select the cell you want to move, right click on it, click cut, and then you're going to select the cell you want it to be either above if you're inserting it above it, or to the left of if you're going to try to move it based on columns. So I'm going to try to move this renewal date into this policy number section. And I'm just going to right click on that box to the right of where I want to place it and hit insert cut cells. And that moves it automatically over into the field I'm looking at. If I then hit cut and insert cut cells here over in column D, then it inserts it back into the left of the selected cell, which was the policy number. You can also do the same thing with entire columns, entire rows, or even multiples. If you highlight for, say, 3 different columns and then right click and hit cut, then you can do the same sort of thing with multiple cells. All this is somewhat basic Excel knowledge, but I'm just covering it in case you need to know. We are going to be covering a few other basic Excel functions before we get into the nitty-gritty on formulas, which is what everyone tends to use Excel for. So if you are new to Excel, this part's for you. If not, I would go ahead and tune back in maybe 5 minutes. Another thing to know before we get into the nitty-gritty of it is some general formatting. As you can see up here, we have a lot of different tabs, and under the Home tab, it's pretty much what you're going to use for most Excel use. This here shows the formatting of the cells you have selected. It's important to have any numbers registered in general or some sort of accounting format, such as accounting, so that it knows that the number you're dealing with is actually a number and not text. If you're going to format a string of text like this one, you should go ahead and highlight the columns, select from your drop-down text, and that will tell Excel that you're dealing with text. Another way you can tell Excel that you're dealing with text is to type what you mean after an equal sign in quotation marks. If I put, let's say, general in here, this general cell is now formatted as text. It does say it's general, but because of the way that it's formatted up here in this formula bar, it's going to read it as a string of letters, not a string of numbers. The same thing goes for actual solid numbers. A good little trick in Excel is if you highlight a range of cells at the bottom right-hand corner, it'll give you the average, the cell count, and the sum of the selected cells. This is just a little cheap way of looking through and getting a quick sum. But as you can see, the sum here is 0.03. If I, however, change this to quotes 0.01 and then highlighted all three, it only sums to 2 because this cell is formatted as a text of 0.01. Now, as you can see, most of the numbers in here don't have an equal sign in front of them. If you just type a number or a string of text, it'll format it in this general format here. That's the format that everything normally comes in Excel. But if you're having problems getting a formula working or something like that, it's a good thing to check first. Next up, we're going to show you some basic cell formatting as well with colors. You can actually change the color of your reference cell over here in the font section. Let's go ahead and make this cell green. As you can see, now it is colored green. You can also change the text color as well over here. As you can see, it's now orange. I'm going to go ahead and Control Z out of that to make it match formatting. But there are a few other manipulation tactics that you're going to need to know to make Excel very useful. If I go ahead and select this top row and go under Editing and select Sort and Filter and hit Filter, then I can actually start using some of the more powerful things in Excel. If I click on this drop down, I have a selection of all of the carriers over here that I included in this selection. Let's go ahead and narrow it to only Anthem clients. I do that by go ahead and deselecting Coventry, Fort Dearborn, and Medical Mutual by clicking on them. You can also do this by hitting Select All and then clicking Anthem. And I'm going to hit OK. As you can see, all the rest of my data is now hidden from the screen, and I can deal with just Anthem clients. You can also tell if something's hidden other than this little notification bar here under the dropdown by looking at the cell values over here. As you can see, my numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4 in blue, and then it jumps to 52. That's just a little way you can see if anything's hidden from view. I'm going to go ahead and show the rest of the data again. Another thing you can do here is you can actually organize things alphabetically from your dropdown as well by sorting A to Z or Z to A. If I do that, it automatically sorts the entire field of my data alphabetically based on carrier. And I'm going to sort it back the other way now as well. If I turn off this filter after a sort, it'll stay. But if I had something filtered out, like I was just filtered on the Anthem again, and I went up here and removed the filter, I'm about to show you that now, then it'll actually show the rest of my data again. Another good thing to know when doing this is the full arrangement of sort options. If I go ahead and select the full table by clicking in this upper right-hand corner box, that actually selects the whole sheet, but we're dealing with a large table of data, and that's all the data on this tab. I'm going to click Sort and Filter and go to Custom Sort. This gives you access to the full sorting options and arrangements of Excel. You can sort it by column. As you can see, it's giving me the letters up over here of all the columns to sort by. And we're going to go ahead and sort by carrier this time. So we're going to choose column A. Another thing to know is when you're doing this sort, it actually automatically includes your header data as part of the data that you're sorting. So I'm going to go ahead and click this check option over here that says my data has headers. Because I clicked that, as you can see, the blue selected area is now underneath that first row. That means that now any data we're sorting is not going to include the headers. And as you can also see, it changed the title of my cell from column A to column carrier. And all the rest of the data I have labeled is labeled that way as well. We're going to go ahead and sort this from Z to A. And then let's say we wanted to add some other sorting data. Let's say we also wanted it to run alphabetically by last name after that. If I wanted to do that, I would click this Add Level button up here, select last name, and as you can see, our values are already selected, A to Z. I'm going to click OK in a minute, but a thing to note is when you have a level selected, if you want to delete it, you can hit Delete Level. You can also copy a level quickly by pressing that button, and it'll make a copy of the data you have. That's just for quicker manipulation of sorting. But the other thing to note is Excel sorts from top to bottom. So it's going to sort first in this example by carrier, going value Z to A, and then it will sort by last name going A to Z. And if I click OK, Medical Mutual is up front because Medical Mutual starts at the end of our letters. And then we also have our client sorted by last name in descending alphabetical order. The other thing to know about Excel before we get into some of the formulas, which are the most powerful thing and tool in the Excel arsenal, is freeze panes. Freeze panes are a very good way to keep data that you want on the screen without actually scrolling through. If I scroll down on this table, as you can see, my header information disappears. And if I didn't know what months this data set meant, or if I wasn't sure which name is first and which name is last, that could be a problem if I'm trying to sort through data. The solution is to freeze the top row. If I always select the top row when I'm doing this, but you don't really have to. If you select the row and go to View, you have access to the different views of Excel. A good question that I got the other day was why there were lines in an Excel view, and that was also from the workbook views over here. If I click Page Break, it changes the way it views the page. But we're going to keep Excel in normal layout. Anyway, under View, if I go to Freeze Panes and Freeze Top Row, then it actually freezes the top row of my data, as you can see here. It's, like I said, very good if you're trying to keep your data organized. If you want to unfreeze the panes, you go to the Freeze Panes again and Unfreeze Panes. And that would be how you go ahead and do that. You can also freeze panes to the left or right by column. If you select, say, Annual Commissions, back through Carrier. And if I do this, it will freeze every pane from E back to A. It won't actually include F. Under Freeze Panes, I'm going to hit Freeze Selected, or Freeze Panes right here. And as you can see, there's this dark line over here, and that shows where the freeze frame is indicated. If I scroll to the right and to the left, I've now got all my policy numbers, first and last names, and carriers, along with the renewal dates visible as I scroll through my table. If I wanted to undo this, I'd do it the same way, by going to Freeze Panes and hitting Unfreeze. You can also actually do this to preserve the top row and the area I had indicated previously, but it's a little bit different. If you select that top row and hold the Control button, and then select the range of other cells you want to select to freeze. I'm doing column E to A, and then click Freeze Panes and Freeze Panes. Then it actually does freeze. Well, it was working the other day. It does have problems sometimes doing this, but typically what you will get, if I unfreeze all my panes here, is you will actually get a full gamut of the cells you have selected frozen. As you can see, that part's frozen, and so is the area to the right. It's a little bit trickier if you're going to freeze panes like this because Excel can be finicky about it. So I normally don't, but it is an option if you're trying to work with a large set of data. So now that I've unfrozen all of these panes, let's get into the most fun, in my opinion, part of Excel, which is formulas. Not only are they useful, but formulas are probably the most important thing when using Excel. It's what makes Excel so powerful. A lot of people think Excel is just a tool to keep track of numbers, but Excel can do a lot, especially when you start getting formulas involved. So I'm going to cover some basic formatting of formulas and then show you a little bit of a tricky way to use them. First, we're going to try and get the monthly commission data here in column G. And the way that I'm going to do that just for this example is I'm going to set the monthly commission here equal to the sum of all of the year over here, all of the year through December, up to S to H, and I'm going to use the sum function. What the sum function does is it takes an entire selection of cells and it adds them all together and gives you the sum of what's in those cells. If I go, actually, let's do it this way. If I go to the bottom of this row and do equal sum, that's how Excel knows I'm starting to do a formula. This equal sign here tells Excel that I'm about to type in something that it needs to process. And then the sum function is a function that adds all of the data. So I'm going to do sum, and then I'm going to put a parenthesis to let Excel know that I'm starting to work on the formula. If you're typing a formula up here in the formula bar, which is just what you're going to actually put in the selected cell, then it'll give you a little bit of a cheat as you go through the formula. As you can see here, it says number 1, number 2, dot, dot, dot. If I click on cell H51 and add a comma to separate, it now highlights number 2. It's telling me that the next cell I click on is going to be the number 2 cell. I click it here, and if I ended this formula where it is, it adds cells H50 and H51 to give me 0.2. I can also extend this indefinitely by simply adding a comma and clicking on the next cell, or I can use one of my Excel notations for formulas. And we're going to do cell H51 all the way through to H2 to give me a total sum of what we were paid in January. If I hit enter, it processes the formula and gives me $85.25 for how much we made in January. If I then drag this over lengthwise across my worksheet from the bottom right-hand corner, it'll actually copy my formula through for that range, but in each different column. As you can see, it's given me the sum of all of these tables here, but something important to note as I click across. See the cells selected in our first column, H2 to H51. If I go over to the next one, it indicates I2 to I51. And if I tab over again, it's J2 to J51. As you can see, the J over here corresponds to the column letter, and 2 to 51 corresponds to the range of rows that I am adding. A way to prevent it from moving your cell references is to add a $sign in front of these. If I add a $sign in front of the H's here, and then drag this formula lengthwise, again, it's actually adding H2 to H51 in every range of the data indicated. The reason it does this is because I added these $signs up in front of the H, and that tells Excel that when I move and copy this formula, I don't want it to change this reference. I could also do it a different way, and I could add the $signs to the numbers here. If I drag this formula across lengthwise, it now adds 2 to 51 for each individual column. However, I forgot to change this H over here and take away that $sign. So it actually adds the entire field as I drag through. If I go ahead and change that over here, H2 to H $51, and drag it across, then I keep all of the same number values, but it changes the column reference. Another thing you can do with formulas like this is you can drag them down. Because of the $signs here, it didn't change from H2 to H51, but if I remove those and do the same thing, you can see our number references have changed as well, just looking at the way it's added. It's adding now H2 to H52, H4 to H53, and so on and so forth. It's just something to be aware of when you're working with your formulas, that you're going to need to format the formula properly. This semicolon here refers to range, which is why it works with the sum function. Another good function to use is the average function. You can do that by, instead of sum, doing the average right here. And it takes the average of your data. As we can see, the average payment during January right now was $1.70 with 5 remainder. That's sort of how formulas in general work. However, there are a lot of different things that formulas can do. If I go under this AutoSum function, drop down here, and hit More Functions, it actually, because I was on the average cell, gave me that. But if I do that again, not on that cell, it gives me a list of most recently used functions here. Sum is what allows you to add multiple cells together, and average we've already covered. But there are also things like conditional statements that you can do with if, which I'm going to show you next. Then I also have things like count, which counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers. There's also a max, which returns the largest value in a data set, and things like that. So Excel has a very wide range of functions that are very useful that you can use. If I go ahead and delete this sum data here, I'm going to show you how to use an if function in this collected cell. Let's go ahead and say that if we aren't paid for one of these months, we're going to want it to tell us in this collected cell. The way I would do that is I would do equals if, and then start my parenthesis and click on my formula bar. As you can see, it gives us 3 sections. It says logical test, value if true, and value if false. What this does is it tells us we need to have a test here to tell something in a range, and we need an option if the value is true, and an option if the value is false. I'm going to say if the range of this is equal, well, no, let's do this a little different. If we're going to, say, add monthly commission, and there's a blank spot, and we want to know about it, we're going to do equals if H2, or let's do I to detect blanks in I. So what this formula is going to do is tell us that if there's a policy that is not paying in February, then it's going to tell us. And if not, it's just going to stay blank. If I click on the February cell, that gives us our reference cell. If it's equal to quotation marks, then we're going to have Excel tell us this data set is not paid. And if it is, then we're going to leave it blank. These 2 quotation marks just tells Excel to keep the cell blank. So that way we will know that if our data set is paid, we're not going to show it here. And if I drag down through, as you can see, anything that didn't pay in cell I registered as not paid. That's a trick that I use all the time just to make sure that the monthly commission, or make sure that we are getting paid fully on every list. That's something that you could use as well, just to keep track of commissions. Speaking of, I actually do have another data table here for a Vlookup, which is probably a more advanced function than most people are used to. What Vlookup does is it takes a reference cell, it matches it to a reference table, and then it puts data in that cell. It's kind of hard to explain, but let's go ahead and do this with annual commissions. Or actually, if I look at my Vlookup data, let's go ahead and do this with the rate per payment, which should be what we're being paid each month. So if I want to put the monthly commission amount in column G from our table over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Vlookup to match the policy number to my data table and export the actual rate per payment. The way I would do this is equals Vlookup, and then it gives us our array. It tells us we need a lookup value, which is a reference cell, a table array, which is our reference table, a column index number, which we'll get to momentarily, and a range lookup, which is actually telling it what it wants to match to. If I go ahead and click on the cell D1, or D2, I apologize, and hit comma, then I get to table array. If I go into my Vlookup data, I'm going to do this off of my range of policy numbers through to rate per payment. And I'm going to highlight the entire data set here. What that does is it tells Excel to pull from the data on table, Vlookup data, and do it from cells E3 to M52. Because we don't want these values to change as we manipulate our formula, I'm going to go ahead and add $signs in here. Our column index number is the column number from our selected data table that we're trying to export. Because we're trying to export column index number, which is our rate payment, we're going to go ahead and input 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 as our number. What that's telling Excel to do is put the 9th column of data that matches to our policy number into the cell where the formula is. And lastly, we're going to type false. That's because we want the policy number to match exactly and not be a near match. I've seen a lot of Vlookups fail because someone typed in true instead of false. And as you can see, it tells us that it should be paying at a rate of 3 every time it pays. Well, 30 cents. And if I drag this all the way down my row, it populates the data from this table that we specified. Another thing to note is if I did not include these here, the $signs, and then did the same thing to the formula, copying it all the way through, it would give me errors because the data set is actually changing this Vlookup data. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-Z to undo all of what I've just done. Then I can also do a similar method for the annual commissions. If I go into my Vlookup data, I actually don't have a payment here listed. It does have an annual payment sum here of what it can do, so I could do another Vlookup, which is actually what I'm going to do here. So I do equals Vlookup, same reference, go into my Vlookup data, select my policy number column, go all the way to annual payment. This distance is actually not 9 anymore. It's going to be 11. So I'm going to put the number 11 and then false. And I'm also going to remember to put in my $signs. And this allows us to go all the way through the range and put it annual commissions. Now we can do something a little bit more specific with the if statement and do nested functions. This is what makes Excel really useful. If I do an if statement and add the sum function to this range, is equal to our annual commission amount, then I'm going to have Excel stay blank. And if not, I'm going to have Excel tell me missing money as text. What this formula is doing is it's adding this entire range, and it's comparing the sum of all of this to our annual commission amount. If it finds that all of the commissions add up to what they should be, then it's staying blank. And if they are not, it's telling us there is missing money. As you can see through here, if I add my range, this actually equates to 3.9, which actually overpaid based on our annual commission amount. So that's something else to keep in mind when doing references like this. The reason it is because I selected the monthly commission here. If I change that to be just cells H2 to S2, then it fixes our formula. And I can just drag that formula all the way through to find our missing money. Another thing you can do in Excel, which based on our time frame, I'm actually not going to cover in full, is to type up something like this. This is actually one of the price comparison tools that Cornerstone used. I believe we used this last year, and I know that some of our other people use this still, but this is just a rate table for insurance that you could make easily in Excel. As you can see, it's all color-coded with the formatting option I mentioned earlier. With color formatting, I also have this Corp 1, Corp 2, Corp 3 rows, so you can compare easily any sort of change as you go through between the policies and help a client find a plan. If you have any questions on this, which is understandable, Excel is a very, very difficult topic, please feel free to reach out to me. At either my phone number or preferably via email. If you send me an email, please send it to tlevine@crnstone.com and put Tech Tuesday in the subject. I'd be happy to send you my PowerPoint notes, which are a little bit more comprehensive on the subject, as well as answer any questions you have about this presentation. If you also have any other questions, feel free to put them in the questions tab now. Have a great day, and thank you for attending Tech Tuesday. Don't forget to connect with us online either at Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn. Actually, I do upload recordings of all of these webinars to YouTube. Hopefully, we'll have this next one posted by Friday if you want to review. Thank you very much.